Welcome all to the hunt, and today we shall be hunting the old everworm, the Shara Ishvalda. What an interesting, wonderfully realized fight. Shara Ishvalda is a triumph when it comes to unexpected fight mechanics and conceptual design. First of all, every time you start a Shara Ishvalda fight, you should always have some slinger ammo so you can immediately just slash him into his left, so you can always slash bonk him on the wall, giving you a free wall bang and a lot of damage off on him. Just from that opening, you can do close to about 3 to 4k of damage on his face. And since the Shara Ishvalda fight is mostly set up in the first few, ignore that bit. But since the Shara Ishvalda fight is mostly set up around both wall bangs and the fact that you need to break most of his rock parts, it's very important for you to understand how the fight works and how the space is utilized. The wall bangs in the rock phase in phase 1 is incredibly important. So, if you're ever going to do this challenge, again, the most important factor of Shara Ishvalda is whether you can bang him into the walls during his phase 1 so you can get a quick phase as possible. Because if there's one thing that this fight is surprisingly that phase 1 is probably the hardest of all of the phases. And it's only because he has such wide area AoE type of damages that even though he's incredibly slow, and usually slow monsters in this challenge are significantly easier to fight, Shara is still troublesome, especially during his hard rock phase, where one move can set you off incredibly worse than any other, because his range of attacks is so large. You need to have really good understanding of positioning before you do any kind of interesting moves. Of course, if you're ever going to go for damage in this phase, you should do so in the face. Pleasure in your face? Stuck in your face, pleasure in your base. That's how it works. With that said, usually wins about half health in this phase. He will knock himself down like he did so to widen the field of the area. Shield Spire Stooge is again an absolute must if you're gonna go in this fight doing this challenge. It will just completely focus up the attack of the Shara, and since he's so slow to begin with, that just means that you get a lot, and I mean a ton of free damage up just because he's on another target to begin with. If you're ever gonna go for something in this fight, especially you're gonna go for the chest and the face, which is why this fight is this phase is surprisingly harder than it is, since aiming for any other part is gonna take you about 10 minutes just to switch phases. I got a lucky topple there, but trust me when I say that doesn't happen at all. Getting trips or topples is so incredibly rare. You will likely have 2 topples or 2 flinches or 2 I also got a lucky ass paralyze here, but there's just a lot of lucky elements that went into this fight. So please don't think this is usual. This is actually super rare in this fight, and you should take it with absolute certainty of caution, because my god, you will have a bad time. And probably his most devastating move is the bulldozer move, where he goes back and forth in the arena, dealing tons of damage. Now, of course, damage is one thing. The main thing that you want to do in this phase is mostly just get a ring of his rocks. So if you have part break ability, that'd be nice, but even so, you don't have really skills here, so we just kind of have to deal with that. Also, this slam and welcome to the jam probably his most devastating move, as his second most devastating move in this phase. So that's about all I have to say about Shara Ishvalda when it comes to phase 1. So let's talk about all of the other factors that make this fight conceptually a very interesting fight, and also very interesting final boss. First of all, this is broken into 3 distinct phases. Trust me when I say there are 3 distinct phases. And although I'm sorry to spoil it from here, but it goes into how the fight can be done and how it's supposed to be fought, or how you can play it safe. In my 1 hour of attempt in doing Shara Ishvalda, I did not succeed into slaying the beast. I got very, very far, however, I did not get it. With that said, Shara is probably one of the best monsters to try and practice against. it can be done. It can 100% be done with a little more practice. I just didn't have that. I just didn't have the skill, or slightly the skill pattern recognition that could potentially do this. So I genuinely think that Shara Ishvalda can be done with this challenge with slightly more practice. Hold on there. Hold on. I have no actual clue how I died during this part. This was one of the most confusing part about this one in particular. Now, when we enter second phase, the first thing you want to try and do is you want to try and get off some wall banks. I go with the poison smoke damage strat here because that's free 2k damage every time you do a poison proc. And I'm not kidding here, any kind of damage is good damage, and 2k proc is about as much as 6 to 7% of his whole health bar. So really, again, any proc that you can have is a good one. Now, if you cannot do the wall bangs because they're generally kind of hard to pull off in this phase, I've never gotten a legit amount of successful wall bangs, consecutive wall bangs in this fight. There's another way that you can fight the Shara Ishvalda fairly safely, and you will have a really, really good time. First of all, you need to understand the positioning of his attacks, which means that if you didn't know, Shara Ishvalda in phase 2 and sequentially phase 3 has no actual way to damage you directly if you stay at the side or behind of his hind legs. So your second priority in this fight should always be, always be to tenderize his tail. Since he has no meaningful way to deal damage to you from back there, your first order issue is to tender the tail, which also tenders the hind legs. And from there, you get a lot, and I mean a lot, of free damage off. It makes his hit zone values actually much more doable, which is incredible, by the way. So, hind legs for the win. That's how it should always be with Shara Ishvalda. Just stick to those like plug and glue, because actually there's no unearthly way he can hit you. The only move that he can hit you is where he sweeps his wings underneath him to try and catch you off, but those only get you if you're in front of those hind legs. So that does mean that you will not get a topple, that does mean that you won't get a couple of things, but in generalities, you should be able to get free damage off. My problem with wall bangs in this phase is that they're incredibly, like, situational as to how you get it. I just got really, really lucky on that rock drop there, just from position. Understanding position is really good. If you have free damage, of course, go for the head, as you should always do, since the forelegs are also a pretty good way to deal damage, but since you never go for the forelegs during this fight, you might as well go for the head, deal as much damage as you possibly can, and then just move on. So now that we're done about this, let's actually talk about the math and see how it fares up. So, Shara Ishvalda has a pretty, I want to say simple table, although it seems complicated at first. Let's go look at the cutting damage, specifically an average of 33, which is lower than most mid-game monster, but then again, it is the final boss of Iceborne and thus should be taken as such. So, during his rock phases, like I said, the only possible location where you can actually deal damage to this monster is in the face and in the chest. That is it. Everything else just sucks. If you look at the math right here, it's 50, 55, and 50. Everything else is 10, 19, 10, 10, 19, 10. Terrible damage. And that's, some of them, they get harder after you break some of the rocks, which doesn't make any sense, but we'll just take it as it is. Oh god, that was a lucky ass dodge. So, if we look at everything else during phase 2 and phase 3, which is the head, torso, forelegs, hind legs, wings, and tail, thankfully it's pretty straightforward, but as you see, the head is significantly weak. 70 full head zone. That is a very large amount compared to other monsters that we've seen thus far. And that is a pattern that will follow for other monsters later on that we will see, but as of now, just be content that you have an extremely weak zone. The torso is at a solid 48 too, which is pretty good. Forelegs at 44, which is pretty standard or around the standard. So again, that's a really good source of damage. The hind legs at 25, the wings at 48, and the tails at 25. So the reason I'm going for hind legs is specifically because you have such a relatively safe tenderizer that in this match that it's a genuinely really easy target that you can weaken so it makes the hit zone value about 35 and thus making it a respectable hit zone to hit consistently. And while you do have to go and tenderize it every 90 seconds, it doesn't mean that you cannot do damage to him, but you can do consistent damage, and thus I heavily recommend going, again, for the hind legs. It's just the most important factor about the Shara. So that is about the math. With that said, let's talk a little bit about the conceptual part of this fight. Shara Ishvalda is an awesome monster, and his lore is just as cool. If you didn't know, there's a thing in WoW that was introduced that was called the Tale of the Five. The Tale of the Five is a series of tales recalling the creation of the new world. With one going into the one slumbering and became the forest or the mountains. There's one that went to a slumber and became the ocean. One that became the sapphire star. One became the forest, and one became the winds, I believe, or something like this. And it's highly believed that in the lore that Shara Ishvalda is the one that became the mountain, the old Everborn, just as Xeno'jiiva is believed to be the sapphire star. And I love how he's conceptually designed. I don't like how he was implemented into the story of Iceborne, because he just kind of like was a last minute shift to the story where it was really focused on Volcana. And I didn't really like that, but outside of that, the old Everborn concept on lore is really, really solid. It's just an incredibly interesting idea that was brought to life into a very conceptually strange and unconventional design for a monster. A rock-covered monster that sheds itself in order to fire sonic sound blasts from his wingtips. It's just incredibly cool of an idea. And not only that, the fact that this creature is mostly fighting blind is incredible until it goes to phase 3. And this is where phase 3 changes a lot of how the fight is done. As you will see, around this entire fight, a lot of sand pits are hanging about the arena. Sand pits are going to be your worst adversaries in this entire Shara Ishvalda fight, whether you're fighting him casually or not. Those sand pits, if they ever made contact with some of the sonic wind blasts of the Shara Ishvalda, they will induce into exploding. Yes, sand pits can explode, and also they will also slow you down by a very significant amount. So sand pits are going to be your worst enemy in phase 3. Any attack that the Shara Ishvalda make contact with will explode these sand pits, and they don't leave the ground until a very specific attack pattern. So you have to be extra caution. You have to make sure you have extra caution whenever you're doing this. It just makes the fight significantly harder. It has a lot of area to deny, only you have to be really aware of your positioning and where and when you attack, making this fight significantly harder. Again, it's not undoable. If you still go for the high legs, it's still a fairly safe spot. You just gotta make sure you're never in a sand pit. And also, the only way you can ever get rid of the sand pit is with what we call the Shinra, no, what was it again? Shinra Tensei? I think it's Shinra Tensei. Or the Spirit Bomb. What a great looking attack. What a fantastic looking attack. I love it. Oh my god. With that said, you also gotta figure out something about the old Everworm is that it actually opens his eye, and the tracking is incredibly unsettling. If you have a look at Shara Ishvalda from a screenshot front up, you'll see that the arrows aren't tracking the character player, they're tracking the player itself through the screen. And it's such a cool little idea that I wish was expanded forward into a lot of other conceptually scary monsters in video games. And it's interesting to me that the only character that I just straight up remember on top of my head that does this is a creature monster from Monster Hunter franchise. It's such a cool idea for a concept, thus making Shara Ishvalda, in my mind, an extremely top tier pick in waifus material. With that said, the only thing that I really am not a fan of when it comes to Shara Ishvalda is, interesting enough, his theme. His theme is just too for me. It just doesn't punch enough for a final boss fight, and it's not scary enough to be memorable enough. And outside of that, I got an unlucky dodge, and that's how the fight ends. Shara Ishvalda A very interesting fight. A very doable one. If you're ever gonna go for a challenge, I'd say it's probably the main goal you're gonna go for. We'll see you all for another hunt